Good afternoon, everyone. This is Marty Duckenfield with the National Dropout Prevention Center, and I'm here with my new co-host and colleague, our new director, Dr. Beth Reynolds. We welcome all of you to Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, a monthly radio webcast brought to you by the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University in partnership with Clemson Radio Productions and the generous support of our longtime partners, Catapult Learning and Penn Foster.
Marty, I'm really excited about joining the Solutions to the Dropout Crisis broadcast, and I really do appreciate all of our loyal listeners out there. Welcome, too, to the new listeners to this program today. Today's topic really promises to be a very informative one. Poverty and school success is extremely important, particularly since we know from our research, too, that there is a very strong correlation between poverty and successful completion of school.
Yes, indeed. And we're all about to learn more about that correlation as well as what we can actually do about it. You know, we know that Tammy has an exceptional program planned for today, Beth, so why don't we get started? Now, first of all, I'd like to remind our listeners of the materials that are provided on the website for today's program. There's the slide presentation, which is, in fact, it's a PowerPoint to support today's discussion. It's been turned into a PDF document, so open it up and have it ready. You will be instructed to turn the pages by Tammy. There are links to a variety of websites that are provided by the Center of Excellence for Preparing Teachers of Children of Poverty. And, you know, Beth, oftentimes we have a long list of references, but this Center of Excellence, kind of like our center, provides a one-stop shopping website for resources of all kinds for teaching these children. So although there are just a few links this time, they are merely the gateway to tons of information that you can go into after the program today.
You're right, Marty. This is really a fabulous website. These resources are really good for helping us understand the many issues related to teaching children of poverty. We can also see data about this challenge there and realize that there are many other organizations that actually do work in this area, like the Annie Casey Foundation and the Children's Defense Fund.
You know, and the wonderful thing about these webcasts is that you, the listeners, have the opportunity to engage in discussion with our presenters. So we invite you to be an active part of the program today. And there are two ways you can connect to us. This is a radio call-in show, so we encourage you to call in your questions for our guest. You'll be able to discuss them with her. Our toll-free number is 888-539-8859. And if you're calling from outside the U.S., my wish, this will happen. Every month I wish this. The number is 864-656-4549. You may begin calling in now or any time during the program. Now we're going to put you on hold for a few minutes, but we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can during the broadcast. And as an added benefit for today's program, if you call in, we'll send you a free copy of one of our Effective Strategies publications. You'll just give Eric your name and email address and phone number.
And don't forget, like last year, your name will go in a hat for a chance to win a free conference registration to our National Dropout Prevention Conference that will be held next year in Atlanta, Georgia, November 3rd through 6th, and that's 2013. We'll be collecting those names during each program across the year, and we'll do that drawing during our final radio program in the spring to see who that lucky winner is going to be.
Yeah, it's such a great prize. And, you know, the current winner will be coming to Orlando, Beth, next month for our national conference. And he is surely one of our most loyal listeners, Carl White from Alaska. So we're looking forward to seeing you, Carl. I imagine you are listening today. We also accept email questions sent to our email address, which is ndpc@clemson.edu. And if you put the word solutions in the subject line, we will be watching for those. And we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. So we're looking forward to all those questions today.
As a reminder, our topic this month, again, is poverty and school success, challenges and opportunities with under-resourced students. And joining us today from a studio at Miller Communications, Florence, South Carolina's news talk radio station, WFRK-FM, is our friend and colleague, Dr. Tammy Pawloski, Director of the Center of Excellence to Prepare Teachers of Children of Poverty at Francis Marion University, which is also in Florence. Tammy, in addition to doing that, is also Professor of Early Childhood Education and is a strong advocate for helping educators combat the many educational challenges that poverty presents in our schools. Tammy, we are truly delighted to have you join us today.
Thanks so much, Beth and Marty. I'm glad to be here. Glad to have the opportunity to talk with your listeners about the work of our center.
Well, we're going to get into it and just realize that when we look at the reasons that students don't graduate, the most consistent at-risk factors, one of those has always been poverty. And I think that rather than accepting this particular Center of Excellence in Florence is on a course to find out just what makes that so, to help us understand those issues fully, and then to help us identify, best of all, what we can do to alleviate this problem as much as possible. So today's program, again, is a very important one. So let's begin, and be sure to call us with your questions throughout. And one more time, that number is toll-free, 888-539-8859. And for those calling outside the U.S., the number is 864-656-4549. Tammy, let's turn to that PowerPoint now, and let's get started. Learn more about teaching children of poverty.
Okay, thanks, Beth. I am following along with my PowerPoint, and I hope that our listeners are as well. So if you, what I will do is prompt you to make a change in the slide. And so if you'll join me now in switching to that first slide, what you see is a graph that shows a little bit about poverty rates and numbers of persons in poverty in the U.S. from 1959 through 2010. And I think that this is a very, very telling graph that shows us just how prevalent poverty is and how much the poverty rate has escalated in recent years. What you'll also notice on this is those little bands, the green bands. Those are times of recession. And as you can see, huge increases in poverty and the poverty rate during those periods of time. We've got a lot of folks living in poverty, and we have so many children who are also living in poverty and facing the challenges of education with limited resources. So if you'll advance your slide, this is just a quick little look at how prevalent poverty is across our country. You can see we live in the South, and certainly in the South we have the largest population of folks living without resources. And you can see wherever you are today how prevalent poverty is in your region. I also encourage you to take a look at the reference. There is a link to the Child Trends Data Bank. This is a great place for you to, a great site for you to visit so that you can tease out some data on your particular region that will help you understand how prevalent poverty is in your region. And then if you'll advance your slide, you can see a map of the United States, and you can see where your state falls as well. Again, this comes from the Kids Count Data Book. If you're not familiar with that resource provided by the NEKC Foundation, I certainly encourage you to also visit that site. Just a wealth of resources to help identify the kinds of problems that folks who live in your region may be struggling with, particularly those related to poverty. If you'll advance again, just as a reminder, we also have 43% of children in 2010 who were living in low-income homes. Now, when we think about poverty versus low income, the poverty threshold provides us with a very baseline level of minimal funding available to exist. The low income level is 200% above the poverty threshold. And so if you are working with schools that have students who are eligible for free and reduced lunch, then that would include not just children of poverty, but also low income children. And what that tells us is that we have almost half of our children living in low income homes. Okay. If you'll advance your slide, 66% of the schools in America are deemed high poverty schools. And you can see from this graphic, the golden segment of the pie chart. Those are students eligible for free lunch, the red reduced lunch, and then the blue area paid lunch. So we just have a huge number of students who are living in poverty or who are eligible for subsidized resources in schools. We've got to realize how many children are struggling. And if you'll advance, what I want to talk a little bit about now are the implications of all this. So we have these statistics and we see that there are large numbers of children living in poverty, but what does that really, really mean for those of us who work with children and particularly children of poverty? What does this mean for us in terms of the educational programs that we provide? So if you'll advance, this particular graph just really illuminates how strongly poverty is correlated with the dropout issue that we face. You can see that the dotted line across the top, this is the poverty rate for low-income students, as compared to the very dark, bold line, significantly lower, and that is the average poverty rate. And what we know is that the dropout rate for low-income students is about 5 times that of their higher-income peers. There's a huge difference in terms of how many students successfully complete high school based on the level of income that their families have. So if you'll advance, you can see that on the next slide, this sort of illustrates how much the income achievement gap persists over time. Again, if you note the orange or golden colored bar, these are low income kids compared to the blue segments that are not low income. And you can see that across the board, from the primary school years through high school and into college, our low income population is strongly underrepresented. And this gives us cause for concern and cause for intensive thinking about what can we do to equalize this and to increase the numbers of students from poverty who are successful in schools. What can we do? And if you take a look at the next slide, this represents the work of Bob Marzano. And again, I urge you, if you have not drilled deep into his work, I encourage you to do so. Robert Marzano has done so much work on school success and effective instruction. And this represents a meta-analysis that he did that considered why children are not successful in school. And for years, we've identified ethnicity as an issue that is connected with limited success. We've identified the level of mother's education. We know that that's important. And we've also looked at family structure, whether a child is from a dual-parent home or single-parent home. And even if our kids are studied and are equalized on each of these areas, in other words, we are eliminating these as variables completely. We're only comparing kids who are the same in terms of ethnicity, mother's education, or family structure. What Marzano's meta-analysis indicated is that children of poverty are less than half as likely to do well in school. And I think that's just a profound statistic that really causes us to look carefully at an issue that for the longest time we didn't want to talk about. Today, we are far more comfortable talking about the role that poverty plays, but for many, many years, this was not an issue that we were willing to publicly address. And today, we're beginning to do that. So why is this important, and what does this translate really to classrooms? Well, if you take a look at the next slide, you'll see just in the bold red, you'll see these are the things that happen to children living in poverty. They're far more likely to fall behind, to be tracked in lower tracks, to be retained, to be labeled as problem students, and to drop out altogether, and certainly their achievement test scores are far lower. this educational impact cannot continue. We've got to try to figure out what to do. And so if you'll advance, what I've spent the last 8 years really working toward is to find some solutions to this problem. And we have at the Center of Excellence to Prepare Teachers of Children of Poverty, we have since 2004 really been looking for solutions to this issue and investigating the impact of poverty and what successful schools are doing. So if you'll advance, the reason that our center is in place is because for many, many years, the efforts that we put into place to try to solve these kinds of problems were just generally unsuccessful. And as a result of that, the research began to look more closely at key factors. And the role of the teacher really emerged as one of the, if not the most important factor in terms of school success and how schools are transformed from low performing to higher performing. And at our center, what we really began to look at is what were the knowledge and skills that children of poverty, that were non-negotiable for children of poverty. These are great and important knowledge and skills that all teachers should have. But what were the kinds of things that teachers who taught in high poverty schools definitely needed to have and to put into place in order to break this cycle? And so from that, and if you'll advance, from that, we began to have a real sense of optimism about what can be done. We know that there are some folks who have believed and perhaps even spoken out that IQ is stable, can't change, and that students who demonstrate poor performance early on will never be successful. Our center has really taken a completely different tact, and the research that we have studied and that informs what we do gives us a completely different viewpoint and this foundation for optimism. We know that IQ is far less important than effort and emotional IQ. We're going to talk a little bit more about that a little bit later on. So IQ is not our destiny. We know that also that brains can and do change. And if you're not familiar with Eric Jensen's work, I urge you to look at his research on the brain. He's really broken some new ground in terms of taking brain research and applying it to the classroom. And then Marzano tells us that 43% of a student's academic performance can be traced back to the quality of the teacher in the classroom. Again, this really dispels that myth that some students maybe can't be successful. And then again, Jensen's work tells us that low achieving students experienced as much as 4 times the gains of with an effective teacher than they did with a less effective teacher. So really an important reason for us to be hopeful and enthusiastic about where we're headed. And so if you'll advance, you'll see the center's mission, this is our center's mission, is to try to solve the problems associated with educating children of poverty by working directly with those who have the greatest and most profound effect, and that is the teacher. If you'll advance, I do want to define children of poverty. At our center, we do not strictly define children of poverty as being those who are living without financial resources, although admittedly many children of poverty do have limited financial resources, and many times the other resources that can be absent are associated with limited finances. When we talk about children who are living without one or more resources, it might be a child who doesn't have a male role model, for example, in their home, or has limited emotional support, or perhaps a limited extended family that impacts the way that child can be successful at school. So it's not just financial resources that we identify as being, as rendering a child to a life in poverty. If you'll advance. So our questions that our center began to address include these 2 questions. Number 1, what contributes to school success for all students? And then more specifically, what strategies are most likely to raise the bar and level the bar for children of poverty? And what that means is that we want to raise the achievement levels of children of poverty, but we also want to equalize the achievement gap between those with resources and those with limited resources. And so if you'll advance, the next topic we're going to talk about is the developmental foundation.
And before we go there, I'll just remind our listeners that they can call and talk to you, Tammy. I know it has a great foundation that's raised, and admire the work of your center in focusing on helping our teachers meet these challenges. But let's pull you guys in out there. We have a lot of listeners, so 888-539-8859 is the toll-free number, and the email address is ndpc@clemson.edu. And Beth, I don't know if you had any questions, because I think our listeners are eager to hear about the solutions, but there might be something.
Well, I was thinking while our listeners are dialing in that we could kind of just look back on some of the key points that Tammy just made for us. I mean, she shared some very powerful data on how big this problem is. Poverty is a huge issue. And then she started telling us about the work that the center has been doing to pretty much counter that problem with actions on our behalf. What kind of things are alterable that we can do something about? So I appreciate both of those bits of information from you, Tammy. Do we have any callers on the line?
We don't, but we are ready to move on. I think they're eager to hear what's coming next.
Well, Tammy, why don't you share with us some pieces before we get into some of the solutions? Why don't you share with us some of the pieces about the impact of poverty on the brain? Because I think that's a very significant piece.
Okay, Beth, thanks. Okay, so if you'll advance your slide. One of the key fact that our research has revealed is that birth without resources and continued life without resources can negatively impact brain development. And when that brain development is influenced by these kinds of exposures, we know that translates into school achievement. If you'll advance. Birth without resources. I want to talk just a moment about what it means for a child who's born into poverty or born with a gestation period in poverty. We know that kids born in poverty are more likely to be premature, to be low in birth weight, and to suffer from a real range of disabilities, such as asphyxia and fetal alcohol syndrome. And our data is really clear on this, and we're going to talk in just a moment about how that affects the brain. Further, we know that, if you'll advance, we know that kids who live their life without resources and have limited access to certain extras, that this also affects brain development. I want to talk just a little bit about these kinds of extras. I'm an early childhood educator by training, and so of course I have always really valued what happens in preschool education and during the years of birth to 5, but the research now is truly bearing out how critical these years are. We know that this is a time when the brain is really being wired. It's being wired as a function of the experiences around us, and without that real positive wiring going on, then we know that renders a child to limited success later on, unless we jump in and do something to intercede to prevent these kinds of continual limited wiring to occur. So some of the early extras that are critical: high quality child care. We know that this is really, really important. We know that ratios in child care centers and the quality of the caregiver is tremendously important in terms of shaping the brain. If you think for a moment about a child who was born and growing up in those early years, say in the 50s, very few mothers worked. They were in the home. They were teaching their child as they were going about the ways of managing their households, and they would swoop in and solve problems and intercede and teach life lessons. We know that was what was happening during that period of time. But today, so many of our children are in child care settings. And we know that children who come from high poverty homes, their parents are far less likely to be able to afford really high quality child care. And when we talk about high quality child care, one of the things we're talking about is just the number of caregivers that provide care for children. And if a child is in a child care center where there are many, many children being cared for by a single caregiver, when problems occur or when teachable moments occur, that teacher just simply doesn't have enough time to jump in and provide those kinds of supports. And as a result, the person that's teaching our toddlers to learn how to emote and to handle frustration and to learn is not a highly qualified caregiver oftentimes, but in fact, it's another toddler. And unfortunately, our toddlers are not really equipped to teach one another how to solve frustration issues and how to share and how to cooperate and also to grow that language piece. So that quality childcare piece is huge, as are stimulating toys. And then reading, really important. We can't underestimate the value of constant reading with our kids. And we're going to look at vocabulary a little bit later on and see that importance, how it plays out later on. And then there are later extras. And you can see just a quick little laundry list of later extras that middle-class parents just provide for their children. And as a parent, I know that when I opted to enroll my child in these kinds of activities or to sign them up for ball teams and those kinds of things, it never occurred to me then, even as an educator, that I was doing this to grow my child's brain. Instead, I thought I was doing it just because all of his friends were doing it, and it was just sort of the middle class thing to do because our peers were doing it. Instead, what we now know is that while we are doing it instinctually or because others do it, what we know is that, in fact, these are some of the most significant kinds of activities that grow kids' brains. They learn how to cooperate, how to function as part of a group. They learn how to manage their time. They learn how to organize materials. And then we know that just exposure to things like music, dance, wires the brain in a far more sophisticated manner. So these extras are just very, very important, even though we don't typically think about them as being brain boosters. But what if a child doesn't have, and if you'll advance your slide, what if a child doesn't have access to critical resources? And again, money's part of it, but time and role models, nutrition, health, sleep, these are some of the kinds of resources that a child might be living without. What are the risks for these children? So if you'll advance, you can see that one of the first brain shots that I've included here is related to stress disorders. And what we know is that kids who live in high poverty environments suffer from tremendous stress, as do their family members. Being without resources makes it far more difficult to have transportation, to access the kinds of things that we need to access in order to be successful. Stress is huge for folks who live in poverty. And what we know is that when we're under stress, the blood in the brain is rerouted from the prefrontal cortex, and it's rerouted to the fight or flight area of the brain. And what that does is it causes us to be far less likely to carefully and meticulously access the executive functioning portion of the brain to make good decisions, to problem solve, to analyze. And then to the left, you can see just a whole list of all the other kinds of physiological changes that happen to us when we're under stress. And this is not unusual. All of us, when we're faced with stressful situations, these kinds of physiological changes occur. The problem is that folks who live in poverty are far more likely to be exposed to stress, traumatic stress, but also ongoing stress. And if you'll advance, another predisposition that we know of for children of poverty is limited language, touch, and interactions. And the reason this is so important is because it also changes the brain. And so if you take a look at this slide, you can see on the left, this is a brain scan of a normal child, whatever normal is, but a child that's had a relatively normal first 3 years of life. And then if you look to the right, you'll see the same aged child that lived the first 3 years of life in extreme neglect. Now, when I first saw Perry's study, I thought that this was perhaps a child that was living in a third world country with limited health care and limited nutritional resources. But instead, this child on the right was a child that was living in an orphanage. And because of the ratio of caregivers to children, this child received limited touch, language, and interactions. And so we know children who live in poverty may not have limited touch, language, and interactions. We do know that living in stress, working multiple jobs, just trying to figure out how to stay afloat creates the kinds of situations where parents have limited time and opportunities to engage in language, touch, and interactions. We also know if children have not been in high-quality child care settings, if those ratios are not such that allows the caregiver to have good contacts with children, regular interactions with children on a one-to-one basis, we know that that also limits the amount of time for language, touch, and interactions. And I want to be really quick to say that this has nothing to do with how much the child care providers care for their charges, nor does it have anything to do with how much parents love their children. This is not about love. This is about time. This is about access. This is about resources. It's about understanding what to do and when to do it. And definitely we know that this can help to shape and wire the brain. And if we take a look at these brain scans, we can see not only differences in size, it doesn't show up very well on this slide, but also differences in the complexity of the brain in terms of the sophistication of the wiring, and also the separation of the hemispheres. So there are huge impacts in brain development that occur when children have limited attachment opportunities with their caregivers and with the families in which they live. So if you'll advance, I alluded to language earlier. This is the very famous Hart and Risley study. What Hart and Risley did was they studied kids from birth to age 3, and they plotted and they coded the parents' interactions with the child across those first 3 years of life. And if you can see, there's very little difference but up until about 16 months. And at 16 months, the tide really turns. And what Hart and Risley found is that by the end of the 3rd year, professional parents, and these are their terms for their subgroups, professional parents had used 30 million more words in speaking to their children than did welfare parents. Now, the implication of that is very great, and that is that if we follow this language piece further into arrival at school, the researchers have found that first grade children from low-income homes know about 50% fewer words than their wealthier peers. About 50%. And this is not just how many words they've heard, but this is actual vocabulary. So at the first grade entry, children of poverty or low-income children, not just children of poverty, but low-income children, their vocabulary is about half the size of their wealthier peers. That carries us to 2nd grade. And in 2nd grade, researchers have found that that 2nd grade vocabulary actually predicts 11th grade academic performance. And so we know that we have fabulous, wonderful first grade teachers, but boy, that 50% deficit in vocabulary is virtually impossible to overcome in just a year. And then some researchers also report, some sociologists also use 3rd grade vocabulary to predict the number of prison beds that we need to have available. And so vocabulary is just so important and such a predictor of later success. We definitely need to consider language and how we grow students' language.
Tammy, yeah, I was going to ask you, I've been writing little notes here about that because I've been to schools where I've seen preschoolers who are coming from families under resource or whatever reasons who do have a very small vocabulary. And it was kind of like that's the group that is getting helped, but they're coming in as 3 and 4 year olds, and by the time they get to kindergarten, they may well be caught up with their peers in language. But I think about all the ones who weren't able to go to that preschool and who hit kindergarten without any of that. Can they ever catch up? Can they ever catch up? You talked about it was hard for the first grade teacher or whoever to take them to catch up in 1 year, but can they ever catch up?
Well, certainly we want to be hopeful, but we do know that language grows in a compounded fashion, much like a compounded bank account. The more language you know, the more you can learn because you can make connections. And if you think about language, for example, if you're reading and unless you have a Kindle or something that you can just tap the words that you don't know and have the definition pop up for you, we know that most students, when they are faced with a word that they don't know, they may employ some quick little strategies, but generally speaking, they move right on and hope it didn't matter. And that's why this vocabulary piece is so important, and you raise a really important issue. If you don't know many words, then you can't grow many words. And so I will recommend one resource, and it may be included later on in the PowerPoint. I'm sorry, I can't remember if I included it or not. But there is a text by Bob Marzano, and it is Building Academic Vocabulary, and it's actually the teacher's manual. It's an orange book, so if you go on Amazon and you look for it on there, you'll want to see the orange one. What's so powerful about that text is that the last half of the book includes column after column after column of key critical vocabulary at every grade level in every content area from kindergarten through 12th grade. And what I love so much about that text as a resource for teachers is that by accessing that, you can target the words that are identified as key vocabulary. We really know we probably can't teach all of the words that are missing. If they're 30 million words behind in terms of exposure at age 3, probably we're not going to be able to teach all of those words. But what we can do is target those words that are seen as most critical. And you may have some other resources for identifying those words, but that targeted vocabulary is a really powerful way to grow kids' vocabulary in a very, very effective ways that are going to translate towards later school success.
And I'm sure we're talking about creative ways to involve those words, not just learning a list of words and memorizing it, but teachers being creative in how they integrate that into their work. And I mean, I'm going to save another question I have, but I'm taking the stage here, but we've got a caller. And then I know Beth has probably got some questions too. So we're going to pause if we can. That slide, change the experience, and you'll change the brain. Is there anything you want to say before we pull in our caller, Tammy?
Yeah, I do want to say one other thing. The slide that shows the 2-to-1 advantage, I just want to mention that for just a moment.
Sure.
When I was in school, learning to be a teacher many, many years ago, there was a great debate, nature versus nurture. Maybe our listeners have heard that as well. What we know now is that debate is not as strong as it was. In fact, many researchers have considered the debate, and what has emerged is that there's really a strong belief that there's about a 2-to-1 advantage of environment over genetics. And what this says to us is that what we do with kids, the environment in which we place kids, the school experiences that we offer for students, all students, but especially in our conversation today about children of poverty, the environment matters. We can make a change. And regardless of the genetic issues or even the early preschool issues, as powerful as they are, what we do, the environment that we place students in, that we can change their experiences. And that leads us to that slide, that next slide. Change the experience and you change the brain. And that's what we have to do. Change those experiences.
Well, this is going to be fun now. We're going to get a caller. Jim is calling from Columbia, South Carolina. We're all South Carolinians here today. But hey, Jim, welcome to Solutions. And have you got a question or comment for Tammy?
Yes, I do have a question for Tammy. loving the conversation so far. What do you think has been the impact of what I'll call pushing the curriculum further down? So what we may have been doing in third grade is now in first grade, and the impact that has, especially based on what your conversation has been so far, on boys who typically may not be ready to read at first or second grade, but with the curriculum being moved down for advancement, what do you think that has, or what has been the impact on that from your perspective?
Hi, Jim. You're putting me on the spot big time.
All right.
I absolutely concur. We are pushing that curriculum down without considering the developmental growth of kids and what's appropriate. I'm an early childhood educator by training. My professional opinion is that first grade needs to look more like kindergarten rather than kindergarten looking more like first grade. We need to have hands-on activities, opportunities for inquiry and exploration. We need to have our kids out into the world, exploring the kinds of things that perhaps they have not explored before they arrived into a formal school setting. We need to go on field trips. And when I talk about field trips, not just to the zoo or to the museum, those are wonderful field trips. But in this economy that we currently live in, we know that schools don't have the resources to take the kids everywhere they need to go that will really wire the brain in a far more sophisticated way. So what about field trips on our playgrounds and field trips to our school offices to interview our office staff and use that information to inform inquiry and practice in the classrooms that's very much hands-on based and tied to the world, so that it makes sense for kids who perhaps have not heard a message that school is important and paper pencil activities are just the way we go about learning. We really need to focus on a curriculum that is experientially based and developmentally appropriate. We have no research to suggest that every 5-year-old should be learning letters and writing words and reading books. We all have our own developmental timetable, and we must respect that and just know who our kids are and what their needs are, and provide a variety of opportunities that will grow the children. When we talk about differentiation, a lot of people think that really means that we have to teach every single individual child a different activity. But instead, if we offer open-ended activities that allow children to jump in and to tackle that activity from whatever level they're beginning, we're going to do far more to accelerate them than we will trying to force a child to jump out of their what we call their zone of proximal development, a Vygotskian term, to jump out of that zone and to jump up to a level that they're developmentally not prepared to tackle. You mentioned male students, young boys. We know that there, again, is a different developmental timetable for every single child. And to suggest that every child is ready for an activity when they enter kindergarten or enter first grade or enter sixth grade, for example, we know that developmentally there's no grounds for that. Add to that the fact that when kids enter school, there could be as much as a 364-day difference between the oldest child and the youngest child, given our cutoff dates that we use to admit students into each grade. And so while 364 days difference may not be much when we're 35, 40, 50 years old, 364 days is a lot of difference in terms of just time for developing and for maturing for a young child or even through middle school.
Thank you so much for your answer.
Well, thank you, Jim, for calling in. We really appreciate you making the call. And Eric will get your information, I know, so we can get you your stuff and put your name in the hat. Beth, did you have any comments? Because it's almost time to move
well,
to the last section.
I'm really smiling over here as I listen to that last conversation, because there's a mantra that we've often heard in some of the circles that I run in that basically goes this way: all students can learn, but in different ways and at different rates. And I agree with Tammy wholeheartedly about the developmental continuum and what research says are strategies to try to work with those kids and bring them up, but to honor what we know about them developmentally. Tammy, I want to ask you one other question before we move into the next piece, and I'm kind of going back to that slide that you had about change the experience and you'll change the brain. And you've talked about some pieces for teachers, even down to virtual field trips in the classroom, and you talked about Marzano's piece with acquiring background knowledge and the 6 simple steps that teachers can use that make a big difference in how many words kids know and retain. But I thought I'd ask you a question about parents. If there are parents out here listening today, are there some resources on the website that you would suggest that they might consider in terms of simple things they could do at home to change a child's experience?
Sure. I mean, the most basic, classic, and probably the most important activity that a parent and child can engage in is reading and talking. We want to take our kids outside. We want to talk about the world around them. Certainly, if we can afford to take them on educational field trips, that's going to broaden the sophistication of the wiring of the brain and the experiences that will expand their background knowledge, that will help to cause them to be successful in school. We definitely want to do those kinds of things. But one of the other pieces that's really important, and I can't remember if I included this for today, given our limited amount of time, but another really, really important thing that parents must do is shape the soft skills of their child. And by soft skills, I'm talking about the ways that we emote, the ways that we interact with others, the ways that we communicate and collaborate and cooperate. For anyone who's interested, if you'll just email me, I'll send you a list of the soft skills that have to be specifically and explicitly taught. We know that joy and anger and disgust, those are hardwired. Everyone can express those emotions. Anybody that's had a middle school child knows that you don't have to teach that eye rolling. You don't have to teach those kinds of things. You don't have to teach joy. You don't have to teach anger. But there are some very specific emotions that have to be taught. And if kids don't learn those, if they're not in a situation where they've had access to a caregiver who intervenes at just the right moment to teach gratitude or to teach shame, for example, or those kinds of emotions. If we don't have someone who can intervene at just the right moment to teach that, then kids arrive at school without those skills. Now, that may seem not all that important in terms of cognitive development, but the problem is that when kids don't express their emotions in the ways that we in society typically expect, oftentimes we take an emotional step back from those children. And when we take that emotional step back, then we're far less likely to give them the kinds of things that need to happen in school, like wait time, extra supports, calling on them more often, those kinds of things. A quick example would be what happens if you as a teacher offer a child a pencil, a child who's forgotten his pencil, and you're saving the day for this child. And so you offer them a pencil and they take it and they go. And they don't say, oh, thank you so much for saving me. I'm not going to have to, be in detention today, or whatever happens to kids who forget pencils these days. And so we might call that child in and say, okay, wait a minute, what do you need to say? And we begin that teaching experience. But what we know from the research is that as kids get older, there's far less time or focus on teaching the acceptable ways to express those emotions, those soft skills. And instead, what we do is we draw a conclusion. You should have known what to do. Therefore, you might not be so smart. And then we take an emotional step back from those children. Very wrong to do this, but yet we know that that's the way it happens. Now, without becoming too political, we all know as we drive through Chick-fil-A what all of the Chick-fil-A folks say. Marty, Beth, what do they say when you place your order in the drive-thru at Chick-fil-A? Do y'all know?
We're looking at each other. We're not quite sure what the answer is.
Let me bail you out then. They say always my pleasure.
Okay.
My pleasure.
Okay.
And the reason that I use that as an example is that clearly everyone who works at Chick-fil-A does not probably use that terminology at home, but that business has seen fit to teach something that they think is very important for their business strategy. Those are the kinds of things that we have to teach kids what to say and when to say it and how to say it. Another interesting study that I read not too long ago was a study on the educational system in China, and we all are oftentimes told how advanced Chinese education is, and many schools are looking to the Chinese educational system for guidance in terms of what kind of tweaks we need to make on our own systems. What this study shared is that the Chinese have realized that while their graduates are cognitively and academically very, very successful, a complaint that they are receiving from employers is that oftentimes their graduates lack the people skills that enable them to be truly successful within their business or industry settings. And as a result, the Chinese are changing they are now tweaking their educational program to include specific and explicit instruction in terms of ways to communicate and to collaborate and to emote in what we sort of casually refer to as socially acceptable ways. So really, really important way to think about adjusting what we do in our schools.
Well, that's great information, Tammy. And I think we want to move on now to get to these strategies, as you call them, Center of Excellence strategies, because that's the heart and soul of our presentation. So let's keep going.
Okay, here we go. So if you'll advance your slides to, there is a slide on the brain change, and I want to talk just a moment about that. This is probably not the best place for this slide to be, but given our conversations that we've been having, brain change is what we know about the brain is it's changing every minute of every day, and it's changing as a result of experiences. So if we change the experience, we'll change the brain. But if you see on the left in the red arrow pointing down, these are reducers to brain change, as compared to in the green arrow, enhancers. And so if you just take a quick look at those kinds of environmental exposures, we can see very clearly that many of our children are living in homes, and not just our low-income population, but many children are living in homes that have high levels of distress, boredom, inactivity, too many video games, and not enough conversations with others. That's that whole isolation piece. And then, of course, nutrition also comes into play. These are the kinds of reducers to brain change that we have to tackle when kids arrive at school. And so what we want to do is we want to look at our school settings, the thing, and compare those enhancers that are identified in that green arrow. We want to be sure that all of these kinds of good things are happening in that 30 hours a week that we have our kids. Okay, so if you'll advance to the next slide, what I have included here is a list of the standards that we use at the Center of Excellence. We actually spent years exploring the research, and we have identified standards that are important for teachers of children of poverty. And our work is based on those standards. So just a little bit of a plug for what we do at the center. Also, on the next slide, you'll see that I have indicated that we're going to talk about 8 strategies for teachers of children of poverty. And of course, we have limited time, so I'm not going to be able to talk at length about each of these strategies. We'll do as much as we have time for. But this is also a great time for me to share that at our center and at our university, we actually teach graduate level courses for teachers who are interested in drilling deep into this study. And I would encourage you, if you're interested in graduate work, we do it in the summer for those of you who are out of state. We would welcome you to South Carolina for a week of study with support when you return back to your schools in the following academic year to implement strategies. And we also offer this coursework during the academic year, and we're beginning to offer it in a distance format. So lots of opportunities for a really deeper study of these 8 strategies that we're going to take a quick look at. So if you'll advance, the first strategy, and it is not first by accident, it is very deliberately first. The first strategy is to develop high-quality, meaningful relationships with our children. A lot of people say, well, why is that so important? And why do we need to think about relationships? And so if you'll advance to the next slide, this illustration of a target, I think best shows why relationships are so important. If you're like me and you're not teacher of the year every minute of every day, or even parent of the year every minute of every day, then what relationships do is they provide us with a safety net. So if we don't hit that target with our instruction, for example, maybe we didn't have the best example to show our students, or maybe we didn't have the best activity, or maybe we didn't start off our activity with a really exciting attention getter, or, whatever we didn't do properly, or maybe we're just having a bad day and we're just not connecting with kids. The idea of relationships is that you can have a bad lesson, not a good lesson at all. And if kids like you and they think you care about them, they're going to hang with you and they're going to say, well, that's not the best lesson I've ever heard her teach, nor did I really learn anything at all, but I like this teacher and I'm going to hang in and I'm not going to make her life miserable by disrupting the instruction, albeit maybe bad instruction that day. They're going to hang with the teacher. Relationships are just a powerful, powerful way to connect with our kids. Now, sometimes I hear, if you'll advance to the next slide, sometimes I hear teachers, especially teachers of older students who have the burden of broad and deep content with limited time to teach it. Sometimes I hear them say, I'd love to build a relationship with my students, but I've got so much to teach. I just don't have time to devote to kind of touchy-feely kinds of activities. And what I'd like to suggest is that the research is really clear that anytime we invest in building relationships pays off in terms of how connected kids are to the instruction. It prevents the need for some reteaching that we have to do later on. It causes kids to work harder, to put forth more effort because they want to please this person with whom they have a relationship. So can't underestimate the power of relationship. Now, I've included on this slide that I think that you're probably looking at now, relationship builders. These are just a few things that we can do in our classrooms every minute of every day that can contribute to stronger relationships with our students. Just a couple of things. We've got to take all stress out of the classroom. Now, that doesn't mean take rigor out, but we have to pick our battles and we have to choose how we teach lessons to students. And by lessons, I mean less about cognitive lessons or instructional lessons and more about life lessons and classroom community type lessons. We have to think very carefully about how we teach those lessons, because if those lessons cause stress for kids, we know that under the best circumstances, it takes about 30 minutes for the brain to recover physiologically from a stressful situation. So if we reprimand a child seriously for forgetting paper or pencil or for whatever, we've got to be prepared to write off a minimum of 30 minutes of instructional time, because that's how long it takes the blood to reroute from the fight or flight portion of the brain back to that executive functioning prefrontal cortex. So stress cannot underestimate the power, the negative power of stress. So if kids are living in stress in their home environments, we want to make sure that school is stress-free. Again, this doesn't mean compromising rigor, but it means removing stressors and the stressful ways that we guide kids. We also want to give them status. Status is really, really important. Status produces dopamine. And I had a colleague tell me one time about how important hormones are and how they impact kids, especially middle school kids and kids approaching puberty and moving through puberty. Carol Dweck's work tells us that dopamine is 10 times more powerful than hormones, which is pretty frightening. And so if status gives us this good chemical and this good functioning in our brain, we need to make sure every kid has status. And I just was talking with some principals who are transforming their high poverty schools, and one of the things they do is they make sure that every kid has status every day. Status produces those good chemicals in the brain that make us feel happier. When we feel happier, we work harder. When we work harder, we do better. Status is really, really important. We want to give kids hope. Hope is one of those kinds of things that if you don't feel hopeful, why do you want to get up and go to school the next day? And sometimes with the way that we do assessments in schools, with negative grading, frowny faces. I hear a lot about agendas that go home with frowny faces or colors that indicate behavior. If a child has day after day after day of bad experiences, there's not much hope. And again, hope is one of those kinds of things that changes the brain. When we're hopeful, we try harder. When we try harder, we do better. So hope is really important also. And then, of course, we want to have as many indirect and proactive guidance activities happening in our classrooms. This is really, really important for kids who have limited power in their lives. One more person telling them what to do and how to do it is not going to really build a relationship. So if our environment can guide children as opposed to the person, that's a great way to build a relationship. And then finally, we want to really access Adlerian psychology and the causes of misbehavior, and we want to treat the cause of the misbehavior in order to build relationships rather than punish the symptoms of misbehavior. And again, there's lots more information I can offer on these topics. And so if any of our listeners want more information, be happy to share it. Just email me your questions or access our website. We've got lots of information. And so if you'll advance to the next slide, just to kind of conclude on relationships, 9 out of 10 kids in this particular study, 9 out of 10 kids who say that they got out of poverty say that they did so because of a relationship. And that's a relationship with a teacher, a parent, a grandparent, a mentor, a coach, a principal, someone who took time to create a bond with a child and to support them and to encourage them to work hard and put forth lots of effort to achieve goals. So relationships are really, really important.
And I just wanted to interject one thing which I've been saving, and that was when you were talking earlier, and I thought this is the place to also mention from my service learning background that youth, college students, high school, middle school students can all play that same role in establishing relationships and being that positive role model. So service learning folks, I hope you're listening because you can make a big difference with these students. Okay, onward.
Absolutely. Great. Okay. So as I indicated earlier, I wanted to talk a little bit more about relationships than the other strategies. And so now let's take a look at the other strategies very quickly. If you'll advance your slide, the second strategy that we think is very, very important is to provide health-related support services. And certainly teachers have limited opportunities. We certainly know that teachers can only do so much in terms of health. But if you'll look at the next slide, you can see just a listing of the key health issues that we see prevalent with low-income students. If you visit our website, we actually have a health resources manual that tackles each of these, and it indicates places in our service area that a teacher might go for resources or support or assistance. Certainly, if you're out of state, you could use that guide and interpolate to your state to identify some places to go for health-related resources. Again, I just want to point out the one that's in the very center, and that is stress. Stress affects so much about student success. We just have to look so carefully at that. Okay, next, our third strategy, cultivate family and community partnerships. If you'll advance your slide to the next. We at the center are partners with the National Network of Partnership Schools at Johns Hopkins University. I believe Joyce Epstein's work there is the gold standard for creating partnerships between families and communities with schools. I urge you to look carefully at their website. It has so many resources for school personnel, for teachers, that will help you to craft a partnership program that will yield the kind of results that our data certainly tells us is the reason for putting partnerships in place. And if you'll advance to the next slide, I have just one quick little look at what makes the Epstein's program at Johns Hopkins so important. It is goal-oriented, and as you can see from this illustration, the goal is at the very center of the partnership, and that goal might be academic, for example, increase math MAP scores, or it might be behavioral, increase attendance, or reduce discipline referrals. And then what makes this program so unique is that they've identified 6 types of partnerships. And once you identify your goal, then you begin to craft activities in each of the type that are specifically focused on meeting that goal. If you take a look at the NNPS website, you'll see wonderful success stories of schools that have implemented this model. Actually, it's aligned with No Child Left Behind and our requirements for school improvement councils. And it is a wonderful, easy to follow plan for developing partnerships that meet the mandates that we have. Also on their website under resources, if you take a look at their promising practices, they publish annually a series of award-winning practices, and those books are available for purchase, or if you just let your mouse hover over the book for just a moment, it will pop up and you can actually access on their website hundreds of activities in each of these types for all grade levels that are just award-winning practices. So urge you to take a look at the NNPS website as you're exploring resources. Okay, fourth, alignment. Now, lots of people ask us, well, why is alignment so important for children of poverty? So if you'll look at the next slide, hopefully this quick little illustration will help to illuminate why it's so important. I'm not a very experienced golfer. I play pretty much every inch of the golf course, much to my husband's dismay. But that is kind of what teaching can be like. We can teach all over the place. But if we have not hit our target, and I'm not, a standards kind of girl, but I do recognize that we live in a standards-based world, and we have to adhere to standards and the indicators that are available. And so if our standard is the hole on the golf course, and we hit a beautiful shot, but it veers off to the right or to the left, then we've not hit our target. And that's much like instruction. If we don't have that club head focused exactly in the right direction, if we don't have our instruction focused in exactly the right direction, then we're not going to hit the target. And why this is so important for children of poverty is that they have typically had far fewer opportunities to be out in the world, to go to museums, to go on educational field trips, the kinds of things that will give them the background knowledge that will enable them to take your instruction that's a bit off a target and move it over to the target as is necessary in order to be successful on tests. And so as long as we live in a standards-based world, we have got to understand the cognitive level at which the standards are written and be certain that our instruction meets or exceeds the cognitive level of instruction. So that's the reason alignment is so important. Okay, if you'll advance to the next one, motivation. Now, as a kindergarten teacher, it's far less difficult to motivate a kindergarten child than it is a high school junior. We understand that. And so we have really looked carefully at the kinds of things that the research tells us can serve as motivating factors. And so I want to just talk about 3 little issues. So if you'll advance. First of all, I want to guide you toward the work of John Vitto. He has a great book called Relationship Driven Classroom Management. It's an easy read, and it's very, very powerful in terms of addressing how we build relationships with kids and we motivate them to be successful. What he indicates is that there are 2 factors that contribute to motivation. One is the value that a student places on whatever we're asking them to do. The other is their expectancy for success on the task. And so I've included a couple of photos of basketball players, and I use that to illustrate the value that we might have if we were given the opportunity to try to dunk on these 2 players. Well, you know, if we were given the opportunity to dunk on the little boy, we might not value that nearly as much as we would to dunk on Michael Jordan, who is flying through the air in the shot that you see. So how much do we value what we're being asked to do? And that's the question that kids are subconsciously asking themselves. Why is this important? Why do I need to know this? And so this dunking experience, do we really value it? Which one would we prefer to do? If the activity's too easy or too hard, how much would we value it? Do we understand why we're being asked to do this algebra problem? Or do we understand how this science experiment connects to real life? How much do we value it? And there are lots of ways that value comes into play. It may come into play because they really see the value of the activity, or they may value it because they value the person that's teaching it. And again, relationships come into play. And then the second piece of this is expectancy for success. Do I really think I'm going to be successful? So while I might really value dunking on Michael Jordan, my expectancy for success on that is not very high. And so if you look at the equation down below, you can see that if value and expectancy are both high, motivation is high. But if either of them is low, then motivation is significantly, if not completely, reduced. So that's John Vitto's thinking on motivation, and I think that we should, as teachers, this should inform what we do. Do kids value what we're asking of them, and do they believe that they're going to be successful? And somehow we've got to shape the experience so that they do in fact value it, and they do in fact believe that they'll be successful. Now, the second piece of motivation, the second researcher that I'd like to point our listeners to is Carol Dweck's work. She has done a lot of work on mindset and whether or not students have fixed mindsets, suggesting that if they work harder, they can do better, or if that would be a growth mindset, or a fixed mindset, meaning it doesn't matter how hard I work, I'm not going to be able to do it. I urge you to look at her work on mindset. We don't have a lot of time today to think about it, but what we do know is that mindsets create worlds for kids. And what that means is I might think I can, if I work hard at one thing, I can be really, really good at it, like perhaps basketball. If I work really hard at it, I can be good at it. But if I had to connect my cable box and my DVD player and all that to the back of my television set, I'm just going to throw my hands up and say, it doesn't matter how hard I try, I'm not going to be able to do this. Those are some examples of growth mindsets and fixed mindsets. And obviously we want our kids to have growth mindsets. And there are some very specific words that we can use that shape a child's mindset. So urge you to either visit our website or to dig deep into Carol Dweck's work. Okay, 6, build academic background knowledge. Our key resource for this is, again, Robert Marzano. If you'll advance your slide, what we know, knowledge is one of the strongest indicators of how well a child's going to do on new content. So if they know a little bit about math, they're far more likely to do well than if they know nothing about the math skill that you're teaching. Background knowledge is really, really important. So if you take a look at the next slide, if we think of cognitive ability as being a rubber band, and we all have different sizes of rubber bands and different sizes of cognitive ability. If we think about IQ being the rubber band that we have, background knowledge is not IQ. It's not the size of our rubber band. It's the extent to which we stretch our rubber band. And the way that we do this is with rich and varied experiences that help kids connect the dot with our instruction that we put into place. So a great resource for this is, again, Robert Marzano's work on building academic background knowledge. Okay, 7, purposeful instruction. So we included this strategy to incorporate all of the research on best practices, best instructional and assessment practices. The reason we think it's so important, if you'll advance to the next slide, is really connected to Slavin's work. And you can see that from Slavin's work, the one attribute that is so important, that really lifts up and elevates the best teachers, is that they seem to know what they're doing and why they're doing it every minute of every day. They're doing it on purpose. Now, that doesn't mean it works well every time. It doesn't mean that they never have a lesson or an activity that is a flop. But what it means is that they knew what the target was, they knew what the goal was, and they were trying to get to that goal, and they knew if they didn't get there. And so that leads us to, on the next slide, some kinds of characteristics of purposeful instruction. Researchers believe that the single most important difference between the most effective schools and the least effective is the degree to which the teachers use data. So data is really important. We've got to use that data. We can't just store it in a notebook or in a file folder. We've got to have powerful ways to view our data on a daily basis. Teacher strategies must be driven by that data. We've got to be rigorous. And by rigorous, that doesn't mean that we're, as our caller earlier asked, that doesn't mean that we're pushing the curriculum down. It means that what we offer is active, deep, and engaging for all of our kids at whatever level they are operating. We believe that purposeful instruction needs to be inquiry-based and interdisciplinary. And if you're in a state that's adopted Common Core, then you no longer have an option in this. We know that inquiry and across the curriculum instruction is mandated by Common Core. We know that we've got to teach certain skills explicitly. We can't leave it to the imagination for students. We can't hope that they figure out how to do it. If we need for them to write a 5-paragraph essay, we've got to break that down into component parts and provide specific instruction on how to write each paragraph so that they see what success looks like, and they've been walked through success. We also believe that children of poverty benefit from model guide support strategies. Again, we don't throw the task at them without walking them through it, then guiding them with some support, and then backing off, but remaining available to lend a hand when necessary. Next, we provide models, templates, formats, and rubrics, and I cannot overemphasize the success we've had with this strategy. I actually use rubrics in my college classes, and I require my students to complete the rubric on themselves before they turn in an assignment. What it does is what I'm hopeful that it will do, and since I started doing this, I've seen great gains in their success rate. But the purpose is for them to focus on the expectations and make certain that their submission in fact is aligned with the expectations. It just causes them to create a better crafted, higher quality product that is submitted for assessment. Models and templates and formats do those same kinds of things for students who have lived in chaotic, stressful worlds, and they've perhaps not created the neural connections that will enable them to create mental maps themselves. What this does is gives them a hand up. It's a little bit of an accommodation that can help them be successful. And then, interestingly enough, the arts must be included. Again, the arts, exposure to the arts, use of music and dance, any kind of art form wires the brain in a far more sophisticated way, and it helps to create connections for children. And so really important to include the arts. And then finally, there is no excuse acceptable for children. We've got to put into place everything that it takes for our children to be successful.
You know, as the clock watcher, Tammy, I'm going to have to weigh in here gosh, I could listen to you for hours, but we've got to kind of go through the last ones quickly. So okay. I'm just mentioning that as we agreed earlier.
Okay. Next slide. These are some accommodations that children of poverty need. We know that organizational skills, prioritizing, short-term memory. I encourage you to look at Jensen's work on this. These accommodations level the playing field for children who've had limited opportunities. Okay, next slide. High expectations. If you look at Jerry Brophy's work, what he found is that 5 to 10% of achievement performance is directly related to teacher expectations. We've got to put high expectations into place, and we can get that bump that we'd like to get on our tests and on student success. And then the last strategy, if you advance to that next slide, leadership. Now, oftentimes we think about leadership as coming solely from the school leader. And without a doubt, study after study after study tells us that the school leader is the most important factor toward moving a school toward a transformation towards success. So certainly we want to validate and lift up that school leader. But if you look at the next slide, actually, before I talk about the teacher, these are some characteristics of leaders that are so important. You got to keep plugging along, persevering. You got to have compassion. You got to know the instruction. You got to know your parents and your community and be able to connect. And you have to have a vision for success that you can translate to those who are looking to you for leadership. But we also know that teachers can be leaders, and teachers can partner with that school leader in terms of pulling more and more teachers on board and especially mentoring new teachers and struggling teachers. So leadership is really, really important also. So finally, just to conclude, if you look at the next slide, how much does teacher quality really matter? Again, from Marzana's work, it matters a lot. 43% of student performance can be traced directly back to the quality of the teacher. We just can't make any excuses anymore. We can't blame it on, our students and what their IQ is, because we know that IQ is very changeable. We can't blame it on their home experiences, because we've got plenty of success stories that tell us that schools doing the right kinds of things can overcome those kinds of issues. We've got to take advantage of the opportunity that we have. If you'll advance your slide, I want to just conclude by saying that it's a time of hope for children of poverty, because more and more teachers, researchers, educators are willing to talk about the impact of poverty, and they're willing to put into place the kinds of things that can make a difference for students. And so So I thank you all for the opportunity to share what we're doing, and I hope that you'll contact us for more information and follow us on Facebook. We put lots of resources on Facebook as well as on our website, and we look forward to hearing from you as you have success stories also to share.
Tammy, this whole session has been so enlightening. It's quite amazing the wealth of knowledge that you have about this topic, and we really appreciate your sharing it with us. We could talk on and on about this to tap that resource, I'm sure. I think we're walking away with some very valuable information about the impact of poverty on children, and maybe what's even better, some strategies that we can counteract those negative impacts.
I mean, I'm just struck by what a tremendous resource we have. Isn't it nice it's in South Carolina? But one of the things that really struck me so much is this whole idea, and to me it's so hopeful about how we can all shape the experience of these young people, the teachers, the school leaders, the parents, the community, the young people that I talked about with service learning, to counteract the effects of poverty. And so I'm really appreciative of all that you have brought to us today. So thank you, Tammy, for being with us.
On behalf of the National Dropout Prevention Center and our listening audience, we want to thank our guests for this month's program. Tammy, thank you so much. You've given us strategies which, not so coincidentally, align with some of the effective strategies from our research, and you've given us plenty of good insights about teaching children of poverty more effectively. Now it's up to each of us to figure out what we're going to use and do with what was been presented to us today as possible solutions in our work for ending the dropout crisis.
So, Tammy, thank you again from me, and we want to remind our listeners that this radio webcast, like all our monthly programs, will be archived on our website within the next few hours, and it's downloadable for your iPod or your MP3 players. Actually, many of my messages, Beth, came from people saying, oh, my goodness, I've got to share this program with my administrators. Is it archived? And yes, it is. So you can go back and you can listen again, and as you listen, you have the slides up there for you. So we do encourage that, and it's a great professional development activity, and certainly what Tammy's center offers is resources, and they themselves to help you go more deeply into this topic, because it is huge, and it was an impressive. I always like to mention, Beth, I don't know if some of you knew this, but we are on iTunes. This is one of my favorite parts, to be on iTunes. My dream come true. So you can go there as well and listen to it in your car, subscribe to us, Solutions to the Dropout Crisis, and hear us over and over again.
Thank you, Marty. You are always the best for bringing in some tidbits that we all need to know. In October, our guest will be Laura Kaufman, who is Senior Counsel and Director of Education Policy for At-Risk Students at the National Women's Law Center. Our focus next time will be on female dropouts and looking at those practices and policies that are related to pregnant and parenting teens. It promises to be another engaging and informative broadcast. In the meantime, thank you all for listening and participating today. Remember, we know why students are dropping out of school, and with research-based solutions, we can assure that all of our students do graduate. Join us next time for more of Solutions to the Dropout Crisis.